Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. Today, we're going to update you on everything that has been happening in coalitions. There have been some developments since the ANC announced that they will be seeking to form a government of national unity. So the first development that I think is worth looking at is what the Democratic Alliance has said. The Democratic Alliance has said the following, that they're happy to go into a coalition, even a government of national unity, on the following basis: that they be protection and promotion of the Constitution, and they talk about the preamble of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the independence of the Reserve Bank. That's number one. I think there's not really going to be any contention around the preamble, the Bill of Rights, except for one thing, which is the land question. Then they talk about an independent, effective, and corruption-free public service, saying that the policy agenda can't succeed unless it's free from corruption and political interference. They want full independence for the Public Service Commission. This is still that cadre deployment conversation. And they want a distinction between political and public service posts. Then they talk about budget. And I think this is where there may start to be some challenges just in terms of terms and conditions. Number one, they want to have a budget deficit to bring the budget deficit to 3.5% or below within 3 years. 3.5% or below within 3 years. And then bring debt to 67% of GDP by 2031, right? As things stand right now, the South African budget is sitting on a deficit of about 5%, right? So they're saying bring this down to 3.5% within 3 years. Then they're also saying bring down the debt ratio to GDP to 67%. As things stand right now, that ratio is about 74%. So these things mean that you have to have budget cuts, right? You have to have budget cuts and you have to reduce the size of government. And there may be issues there. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Then they talk ideologically around some of their stuff. The unbundling of Eskom, the concessioning of ports, which is basically a form of privatization, water regulator, another privatization, skilled visa program, title deed reform, mineral rights reform, spectrum availability. It's unclear what they mean by mineral rights reform, but there are going to be some issues around what they've mentioned here in respect to the privatization to other partners. Then they talk about devolution of powers, which is passenger rail and also criminal investigative power for Metropolis. So basically, they want to have more police powers in the Western Cape. Then they issue some other things which I think will give them some challenges. Full parliamentary oversight, multi-party access to budgeting process, multi-management team to clear contentious policies ahead of cabinet meetings, and a dispute resolution mechanism. Right. So let's go back to some of the things that I said would be an issue. As things stand, and this is the framing metric that I want you to keep in mind, as things stand, we have massive unemployment, massive levels of poverty, and then we have high inequality. These are the three challenges that everyone agrees are facing South Africa. Then there are other challenges under that, which are also quite significant. Quality of healthcare is very low. Quality of education is very low, and the levels of crime are very high. In order to deal with the poverty and unemployment question, you need to actually have a high growing economy, fast growth, right? The last economic indicators that we looked at indicated that the South African economy for this year is projected to go at between 0.6 to 0.8%. That's very low growth. Do you really need to have 5 to 6% growth year on year to really try to solve some of the problems which the economy is facing? These challenges, the growth challenges, require you to actually stimulate the economy, right? Stimulus. The DA policy looks at actually austerity, right? And this is where the challenge is going to exist. Can you grow an economy with austerity versus stimulus? To create stimulus, you need to put more money into growth areas, right? Like employ people in the short to medium term, that requires you to employ more people in the public service. That's what it means. It means you need to create more workers so that there can be more people spending within the economy, buying goods, buying services, then that money trickling down to other people as well, right? You also need to make sure that there's more economic activity. So when the DA speaks about bringing down the debt and also bringing the budget deficit to 3.5%, they are speaking about spending less money. Where would you spend less money? On education. Where would you spend less money? On the public service. Where would you spend less money? On healthcare. Where would you spend less money? On social welfare. Can you see that these things are not necessarily going to create short to medium term economic growth? Oftentimes, when an economy is in low growth or recession, the governments of that country choose to stimulate that economy. We saw that being done in America during the pandemic. We also saw it being done in America in 2008. This is an ideological tension that I think will lead to perhaps this first draft of the DA terms and conditions not particularly being adopted by the ANC, because, well, some of the ANC thinkers right now embrace austerity. We saw Enoch Godongana actually coming to cut various things within the budget, stimulus areas like education. You need to spend money on education because that is where you create more high value taxpayers down the line. Cutting spending on education is a bad idea. That's like starving the goose that lays the golden eggs in hope of getting more golden eggs down the road. It's not a good idea and something that I think we all need to be cognizant of. So these are economic ideological frameworks. Then not really ideological strategy, let's say. Yeah, but it is also ideology, right? Those who believe in austerity have an ideological framework that fits that. Those who believe in stimulus have an ideological framework that fits that. But that is all within the framework of market capitalism, for instance. When the Americans choose to stimulate the economy, they're not, socialists for doing that. They are still within the, market framework. It's just that they believe that the best way to reboot an economy is to actually create more jobs, create more spending in the short to medium term, because that economy will need that to create jobs, right? But now going to another ideological group of battles which will ensue as a result of this. This one about privatization. In the market, there's no problem with having companies competing and providing services to people. In fact, the idea of competition is that the more people you have competing, the better the service delivery is for customers because they're competing, right? The second one is that you will have innovation. And the third one is that you will have reduction of pricing because you have all of these players competing in the market to provide to the market. However, that logic of the market of the invisible hand does not apply to public goods. Public goods are particular sets of goods that tend towards monopoly, right? So if you look at water, you look at electricity, these are the type of goods that are best placed to be provided in the hands of the state. What the Democratic Alliance is seeking is privatization of public goods and infrastructure, water, electricity, ports. This kind of a thing does not lead to positive outcomes. And I give you the example of what happened with Thames Water. In the 90s, the United Kingdom privatized their water, they privatized their electricity. Fast forward to 2024, the water, Thames Water, has got sewage in it. The company that privatized it is failing and is seeking bailouts from government. And the government now is thinking about actually nationalizing water because the quality has gone down, the financials are bad. Why did that happen? Because water provision is basically a monopoly. You cannot go to another provider if your water provider is bad, right? You're stuck with the provider you have. So if the Terps have sewage water, that's it. You can't just go to a supermarket and change your provider. That's why you need to actually fight to have accountability. You need to fight to have people in that particular system in the delivery who are competent and qualified, but privatizing can have bad outcomes. And this has also happened with electricity in the UK. During the pandemic, the UK electricity prices skyrocketed because they had privatized all of their energy and then also were importing energy from France, which has a nationalized electricity provider. So the cost of energy, and there, it gets really cold. So you need heat. People were actually suffering from heat poverty. They had to go into these communes where heat was being shared. So you'd leave your house, go to a place which is warm, just so you can experience warmth. It was one of the most bizarre things to see, and it was a factor of the privatization of public goods. This is where also they're going to have some resistance from within the ANC and also from outside other partners. Some of them will be socialists, some of them will not be socialists, right? So these are some of the challenges. The last one is this question of oversight. It's unclear whether the ANC will allow the DA to occupy a speaker position, which is a very powerful position in parliament, because parliamentary oversight speaks to things like this. They will have to articulate what they need, right? But it's unclear to me that they'll get this. So that's the DA position as things stand right now. Let's look at the ANC position. Not the ANC, sorry, the EFF position. The EFF has rejected the government of national unity. They've rejected it outright. This is what Floyd Shivambu had to say.
I remember we tried before. There are political parties here in South Africa who say that they will never ever meet with the economic freedom fighters. So we say whoever must want to constitute the government with us should have an appreciation of what we stand for as a movement. But two, we also said that because we are expected to constitute a government within the 14 days after the official announcement of the results, we do appreciate as the EFF that there are certain areas in detail on policy that can be finalized later on, but the base agreement should be consolidated. And that is an avowed and clear agenda to pursue an agenda that seeks to undo the legacies and remnants of colonialism and apartheid in South Africa. Must be an appreciation on an approach to the land question, on free education, and all these other aspects that we've highlighted. Let's deal with this issue of the government of national unity. We are opposed to the government of national unity in as far as it resembles what was concocted in 1994. So if you were to check the outcomes of that government of national unity of Nelson Mandela, it had FW de Klerk as an executive deputy president. It had Pik Botha as a minister of mineral resources and energy. It had André van Niekerk as a minister of land and agriculture. It had some mayor from the National Party as minister of the environmental affairs and water affairs. And even he had in social development a minister which came from the apartheid establishment. We do not want to form any part of a government with representatives of white colonial and apartheid system. And we think now that through fair observation and what got to happen with the Democratic Alliance and all these minority white parties, they represent that agenda. That is why the beneficiaries of the white capitalist and apartheid colonial establishment exclusively funded the Democratic Alliance and all these puppet parties. A lot of resources, hundreds of millions, were invested not just to fight the ruling party, the ANC, to fight against the economic freedom fighters. When we had political organizations who dedicated their energy, their resources, human capital, and everything else that they dedicated was against the economic freedom fighters. We're not going to form part of any government with the Democratic Alliance. We're not going to sit alongside the Democratic Alliance and Freedom Front Plus in government as the economic freedom fighters. And we are not desperate for positions in government. We're not going to do everything in our power so that we're appointed into cabinet or we become speakers of parliament and all of these things. We're not going to sit alongside the land thieves. We're not going to sit alongside the people who got to benefit unlawfully for a very long time from colonialism and apartheid. We're not going to sit alongside them and constitute the government of South Africa. If the ANC wants to choose that route, they can go ahead and do what they did in 1994 And we know what are the consequences of what happened in 1994. Black people and Africans in particular remain on the margins of economic participation in South Africa. Black people more or less stay in the same spaces that they lived under when apartheid had segregated black people into inferior spaces. It's still a lived reality. Racism is still a reality. Poverty of our people is still a reality because of this government of national unity. If there's going to be any government of national unity, there must be clarity of what unity, what are you uniting on? And our agenda that we're placing is that the land question that must be at the center of what unites whatever government is going to be constituted must be a common agenda to improve the lives of our people, because our people are still on the margins of the economy. It must be an agenda to provide free education, must be an agenda to protect workers' rights and interests, to enforce minimum wages in all the sectors where they're applicable. That is what the agenda should be all about. It must not just be about position sharing. It must be on principle issues that primarily emancipates and protects the interest of our people. That is the agenda that we are looking into.
There's a bit of a contradiction in the EFF position, and I must say that from the jump, because previously we've heard EFF leaders saying that they want to have a government of national unity, and they think that a government of national unity is important, right? If you recall, this is what Julius Malema originally said. I want to play also what he said at the Results Center. But I mean, there's a bit of a contradiction there, and I think people who are calling them out are justified to say, hey, sounds a bit contradictory because you embraced this thing before. Let's hear what Julius said before and what he's saying now.
We need a government of national unity constituted by all of us who are not driven by political party interest, but the interest of South Africa to resolve this immediate crisis, which will affect all aspects of our life. The story of government of national unity. Mandela. We don't do government of national unity. We don't want it. So we want coalition. We don't want government of national unity. We will end up with the wrong people.
Sinao Tambo went on to Twitter, and he's one of the prominent leaders and thinkers in the EFF. This is what he said. The ANC has not learned from the mistakes from 1994, and as a result wants to include us in repeating them in 2024. In the 1994 transitional moment, global markets had keen interest in SA's economic and political trajectory, particularly after the fall of the Soviet Union. As a result of these pressures, the 1994 transition was characterized by the same market pressures we see today after the 2024 election. Our political and economic outlook must center markets over people. The ANC succumbed to markets during this transition and abandoned nationalization and socialist ideals as policy, and aggressively pursued GEA, a neoliberal economic outlook which hard-lined on privatization and dependency on foreign direct investment. The markets thrived, the people suffered. The demands of the markets and the fear of a progressive socialist-oriented black majority government determined how the ANC responded then, and it is determining how they respond now. And it is no coincidence that Ramaphosa was part of compromise then and is part of compromise now. Ramaphosa, and perhaps he thought smartly, is hiding behind the sentiment of the government of national unity to avoid the fact that he is once again the coward at the center of failure to rise to the occasion and defying the markets. The GNU must be viewed as a repetition of 1994 in the negative sense. It is to succumb to the markets whose charge is being led by the DA. To us, 2024 ought to mean an opportunity to do what we failed to do in 1994, not to lazily repeat it. The contradictions between us and the forces of the markets are irreconcilable because national government, unlike municipalities, is driven by ideological orientation, law, and policy making. Nationalization and privatization cannot exist in corridors where policy is made. Free education and loans for education cannot exist. State-owned ESCOM and unbundling of ESCOM cannot coexist. Right? I think he wanted to say coexist. So going back, nationalization and privatization cannot coexist in policy. What am I doing now? Nationalization and privatization cannot coexist in corridors where policy is made. Free education and loans for education cannot coexist. State-owned ESCOM and unbundling of ESCOM cannot coexist. a unitary state cannot coexist with calls for devolution of powers to provinces. Cutting ties with Israel and solidarity to Palestinians cannot coexist with Zionism and genocide. This is what Sinao Tambo said. So he's trying to articulate here why they are taking a different position from what position they took when they actually gave DA support in local government, right? They didn't enter into coalition with them, but they gave them support so that the DA could actually run local government. So these are some of the dynamics. At the same time, we've seen a multi-party forum being formed by parties such as UDM, Build One South Africa, asking for the Chief Justice to call a meeting of all of the 18 political parties so that they can discuss this idea of a government of national unity. So just to finish commenting and comparing the issues that will exist between the DA and the EFF in a coalition, one of them is that the DA wants to protect land rights as they exist, which is status quo. But the EFF is saying we need to deal with the land issue and the land injustice that continues to prevail. And this is going to be one of the tricky parts. I think what the EFF is trying to do is to underline that CODESA did not succeed and that CODESA actually gave the market a pass for their role in apartheid and actually allowed them to continue to make profits without being held accountable for their role and without restructuring the economy to make that economy inclusive. Part of the reason why we still have massive inequality in South Africa is because a lot of the businesses which prospered under apartheid continued to prosper under the South African democratic dispensation, and they did so as oligopolies. The same people who were funded by the Broederbond, who were funded to create economic hegemony in Stellenbosch in particular. And there's an interesting book, Stellenbosch Mafia, which looks at a lot of this history. Those same people and their grandchildren continue to dominate the South African economy. Companies such as Remgro, then you've got Rembrandt and all of these other companies which are Rupert owned. Then you've got Naspers and several others, right? They continue to dominate the stock exchange, the JSE, and they continue to own a lot of the assets in South Africa, various things. And then you've got what we can call children of that particular group of entrepreneurs, where you've got entities such as Capitec, right? Where if you look at the history of Capitec, you'll find that Michel Leroux and others, they looked to Rupert as a mentor. They were mentored by Rupert and supported by Rupert at various points in history. So it's a curious feature of the transition that market interests, and particularly those oligopoly market interests, continued to prevail in the new dispensation. And if you look at the amount of assets that Remgro owns, you'll be shocked. Even if you look at Vumatel, new technologies, they're there. They're basically everywhere. And that's not necessarily something that benefits everyone. And this is part of the challenge. So the property conversation is one of the big differentiators between the Democratic Alliance and the EFF. And it looks as if the EFF is trying to underscore that CODESA moment and to maybe go back to its fundamentals, because they did lose some support as an opposition that is based fundamentally on the issue of land, and to try to regain some of their ideological integrity on that issue in terms of like, we're not going to compromise on this thing anymore. And maybe they see a benefit from a game theory perspective of focusing exclusively on the issue of land and then being the opposition. Because if you go into a coalition, you're no longer the opposition. And the EFF may view that, hey, actually, let's just oppose and not go into this whole thing. Let them make their own coalition. Or the other game theory could really be that, there's a lot of hostility to the DA within the ANC proper. And the DA, pursuing the DA, if MK is out, if EFF is out, and then trying to make DA IFP coalition, which was already what they were already originally trying to do, then the market favored option, that could actually remove Ramaphosa. Because remember, he doesn't have the kind of support in the party that he used to enjoy. He's lost 22 points from 62 to 40, right? And that's a loss in percentage terms of 36% for the party, actually 37% for the party. And there are people who are critical of if they go into a coalition with the DA, what that would mean for the ANC going into 2026, 2029. People who want to be presidents, there's many people who've been waiting for a long time to also, have a chance of being the presidential candidate and potentially the president. So it may very well be that the EFF is also saying, look, we're not going to save Ramaphosa by coming into this GNU. Let them fight it out in the ANC so that they can determine who their next leadership is going to be, and then we can make deals. All of this is just showing that there's been very little progress up until this point. You know what I would like to see? I would like to see, not chaired by the Chief Justice or anything like that, but I would like to see all of the big parties negotiate in public, not in corners, not having like billionaires having side meetings with John Steenhuisen and Stellenbosch, etc., private phone calls between this billionaire and President Ramaphosa, and you don't know all of that. Go into a room, bring the cameras, record everything. Do it, almost like what they do at the UN. Let everything be known. You can still go caucus outside, but let us see your main deliberations. Bring the country into confidence so that everyone can know, because the other issue with CODESA is that everything was done not so much in the public. You hear about this, you have to read so many books to figure out what deal was made, what was not, all kinds of secret negotiations. I think the secrecy is part of the problem. I think that there's merit to the idea that bring everyone, let them all present their arguments, negotiate in public, so that the public can also weigh in about what they like, what they don't like, so that they can see what the real issues are. And anybody who wants to make submissions, a CEO, a billionaire, whatever the case may be, also do it in public. The secrecy is what causes part of the problems. The secrecy is what causes a lot of the issues that we all have to then try to unravel later. That's what I would like to see. I don't think we'll see it, but it would be my preference. What do you think, though? Do you think that we're on track? This has to be done by the 18th of June. 10 more days left at the time of this recording. Do you think they're going to make it? Do you think so? I don't know. Let's have a conversation, though. Jump into the comments. Please subscribe. Guys, 89% of the people who are watching these videos are not yet subscribed. Hook me up. It's just a, and then this takes it up. Lets YouTube know you like the content, you appreciate the consistency, you appreciate the voice on this particular platform. Please, man, just right. Okay, cool. Thanks so much for watching till the very end. You're a real one for that. Till the next one.